Hey everybody, it is Thursday, April 4th, 2024. 4424, Jill. You're listening to the Mo.news podcast. I'm Moshe Winnable.
And I'm Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to. Jill, it's a very important day today, April 4th. I read online that someone made this National Hug a News Person Day. This is a real day, I'm told.
So, Moshe, if your adoring fans see you on the street, do you want a hug? Or
Sure.
Do they need to ask permission first?
It's raining in New York. It's going to be a little gross. I think you ask permission to hug, but I'm open. I'm a hugger. But if there's a news person or journalist in your life, just tell them it's National Hug a News Person Day. I want to show you love for what you provide, for the information you provide on a daily basis.
Okay, so let's do our jobs then, right? As news people, let's get to the headlines here.
Let's earn that hug. By the way, apparently also today, it coincides with National Burrito Day. So I think if you can combine those, buy a news person a burrito in lieu of a hug, I think that's an option as well.
Would you rather the burrito or the hug?
Jill, burrito by a mile.
I hear ya.
Jill, sending you a virtual hug, and if you would like, I'll order you a burrito out there on Long Island and tell me your favorite place.
A virtual burrito does nothing for me. So
No. We'll try to get you an actual one.
Okay, let's get to some news. Starting with presidential politics, Joe Biden thinks Florida is winnable in the wake of the new abortion law taking effect in that state. Meanwhile, Donald Trump and GOP leaders are pushing to change Nebraska's electoral votes to winner take all. We'll explain.
And Hillary Clinton is chiming in with her views of this election. We'll tell you her controversial remarks this week.
Overseas fallout continues from the killing of World Central Kitchen aid workers. Plus, Taiwan's strongest earthquake in 25 years has taken at least 9 lives. In Ukraine, a controversial move by President Zelensky lowering the draft age. In business news, what is Apple's next big thing now that it's no longer working on its iCar? Plus, Spotify's price is reportedly going up again. And Bernie Sanders is pushing for a 4-day work week, but will it ever happen?
Feel the burn. Only 4 days a week, though. That's why we call it Friday Eve right now, but Bernie wants this to actually be the real Friday.
Plus, Moshe is on this day in history.
Jill, we remember a couple famous songs from the 80s and 90s, and we also look back on the Martin Luther King assassination on this day in 1968.
Okay, let's start with presidential politics. Earlier this week, we reported on Florida's new 6-week abortion ban slated to take effect soon, now that the state Supreme Court said that it could move forward. The court also approved an initiative to let voters decide whether to amend the state's constitution to establish a right to an abortion. Well, now President Biden's re-election campaign team says that it believes he can win Florida. Trump won Florida in both 2016 and 2020. The state has been getting more conservative, but Biden's camp said that it believes that opposition to tight abortion restrictions have now put the state back in play. So the campaign wrote a memo earlier this week outlining its strategy to flip Florida. It said abortion rights will be front and center in Florida this election cycle, thanks to the, quote, new extreme abortion ban, one that Donald Trump personally paved the way for. Democrats crediting the debate over abortion rights with driving supporters to the polls for the midterm elections. If you remember, Democrats did a lot better than initially expected.
Right. They had fears of a so-called red wave in 2022. But in the aftermath of the Roe v. Wade, the overturning of Roe v. Wade, they saw a lot of women continue to stand with them. Now, remember the last couple cycles here, we've seen the swing states really shift northward, right? To Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, most recently Georgia and Arizona have become the new swing states, whereas 10 plus years ago, we were talking about the Ohios and Floridas of the world. Both states have become more red over time. Then you had the Colorados and Virginias, which used to be swing states that have gotten more blue over time. But there is a lot of hope on the Democratic side that the abortion issue really brings out their voters, really brings specifically women out and young women out in droves who might otherwise not be motivated to come out and vote for them. So now that there's going to be a 6-week ban in Florida as of next month and the chance to overturn that in November, they have high hopes of returning the state to the blue column. The last time Florida voted blue, 2012 for the Obama re-election. Right now, Trump still holds a substantial lead in Florida. Remember, this is also the state that has given 2 terms to Ron DeSantis, including a blowout victory in 2022. So you have seen this state evolve. And it will be precarious ground here for Donald Trump, who needs to ensure that the right sticks with him, but also knows that abortion is a difficult issue for Republicans, especially as they try to seek people in the middle. Trump has said that he's been leaning towards a 15-week national ban on abortion. This is something Republicans really have been pushing him to do on the right. Remember, it's a state issue right now, but he came out in support of that. And that was music to Biden campaign's ears, seeing as how they can now campaign against Trump, saying, listen, he literally wants to put an abortion ban in effect at 15 weeks. Remember, in many states where it remains legal, it's up to 24 weeks with leniency beyond that. We should note the Biden campaign already trying to get this message out there. They released an ad on Tuesday featuring a clip of Trump boasting about how he helped overturn Roe v. Wade by picking his 3 conservative justices to the Supreme Court.
Also making news, former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton telling voters to, quote, get over yourself when asked what she has to say to people who are upset about a rematch between former President Trump and President Biden. So she was on Jimmy Fallon's The Tonight Show, and she pointed out the differences in the candidates that she thinks are pretty clear. Take a listen.
But it's Biden versus Trump. We
Yes,
know that.
It is. It is.
What do you say to voters who are upset that those are the 2 choices?
Get over yourself. Those are the 2 choices.
Yeah, I love that.
Right? And
good.
You know, it's kind of like one is old and effective and compassionate, has a heart, and really cares about people. And one is old and has been charged with 91 felonies.
ESPN commentator Stephen A. Smith responding to Clinton's comment, noting that Clinton herself lost to Trump in the presidential election back in 2016. He said, how did that work out for her in 2016? He said, I don't think it was a very wise statement on her part, because the last thing that you need to do is do anything that could agitate a potential voter in this particular election. Trump currently has a very small lead over President Biden, particularly in 6 of the 7 swing states.
Yeah, Wall Street Journal poll came out in the last day showing that he continues to dominate there. Jill, we posted that clip of Hillary to our Instagram feed, and people were not very kind to the former First Lady, former Secretary of State, saying she's invalidating their emotions, that this is why she lost in 2016, and it goes on and on. Now, there were some supporters who were saying she's right here. People need to buck up and deal with the fact that they're going to have imperfect choices. Jill, I imagine this is going to be one of those lines from Hillary. She's had a few of these through the years, like calling Trump supporters a basket of deplorable people back during the campaign in 2016. In this case, telling people to get over it. Already the left, progressive, saying, no, we will not get over it. And they've never been big fans of hers. And they point out that they don't have to choose between those 2, that if Robert F. Kennedy Jr. gets on the ballot, he's gotten more progressive in recent months with his choice of a VP and some of his issue stances, that they might go with him. And in particular, progressives that are upset about the war, they have the Cornel Wests and the Jill Steins of the world who've been more critical of U.S. support for Israel. They're more pro-Palestinian. We should note RFK Jr. has actually been very pro-Israel as well, as pretty much in line with Trump and Biden on that issue. So depending on where you're voting, you could have a third-party choice. This comment is probably not something that the Biden campaign would have had her say, but she did say it Monday night. And to the extent that she gets attention, it got some attention. As we wrap up politics here, one other story we're watching is what's happening in Nebraska. Trump and Republican leaders there are pushing for Nebraska to change how it allots its electoral college votes. Now, remember, when you go to vote in November, you actually elect the electors of your state. It's not, we don't have a direct democracy here in the U.S. Each state has a certain number of electoral votes, hence why we discussed Florida earlier. They have a lot of them, and that's why it's a key state for Biden there. And Nebraska is one of two states, along with Maine, where they actually allocate their electoral votes in multiple ways, whereas 48 states are winner-take-all states. Whoever wins gets all the votes. In Nebraska and in Maine, they have an arrangement where several of the votes go to the statewide winner, as well as several of the votes go to the winners of individual congressional districts. Now, in Nebraska, you have the district around Omaha, which is a district that Democrats have won a couple times. Obama won it once, and Biden won it in 2020. That gives them one extra electoral vote, and given how close elections are, that matters. Well, now there's a push in Nebraska by Republicans and Donald Trump to change the law there and make it a winner-take-all state, which effectively would mean that all 5 of their electoral votes in Nebraska would go to Republicans. Omaha would lose a sort of individual vote there. And there are a whole number of combinations where if Biden loses certain states, he needs that single electoral vote to win the Electoral College. And there are some scenarios where if he loses certain states, and again, Nebraska becomes a winner-take-all state, where we go to a 269 to 269 Electoral College tie, which we've had once in American history. It then goes to the U.S. House for a vote on who's president. Well, the U.S. House is controlled by Republicans right now. So Democrats watching this closely, concerned about this. It's unclear whether this will go through, but for those electoral political nerds out there, again, Nebraska, Maine, the 2 states that divvy up their electoral votes, and a push from Republicans here to change that.
I was listening to Morning Joe this morning, and Joe Scarborough was basically saying, all right, well, if Nebraska does it, then Maine should do it also, because it would basically have the opposite effect.
Right,
giving
Maine,
all of the states, giving all of those delegates to Democrats. So it would kind of balance it out.
Right. Maine has a district that sometimes goes red. And in this case, the majority Democrats there would make it a winner take all that would totally go blue every single time. So again, we live in an era now, Jill, where the elections are so close. Going back to 2000, which was a couple hundred votes in Florida. 2004, John Kerry, George Bush was several thousand votes in Ohio. 2016 close, 2020 close. So every vote matters, and every electoral college delegate matters.
All right, now to the latest in the Middle East. In the aftermath of the airstrike that killed 7 international aid workers in Gaza, Israeli officials say their investigation into the IDF strike on a World Central Kitchen convoy on Tuesday is progressing. The Southern Command has completed its probe, which it presented to the IDF Chief of Staff. It will eventually go up to the chain of command in the next day. A preliminary investigation by Israel into the attack indicates that forces wrongfully identified the convoy as hostile targets. They say they had no intention of harming WCK aid workers. It comes as the Israelis have faced international condemnation and demands to better address the safety of aid workers and civilians in Gaza as they wage their war against Hamas. The Biden administration has been extremely critical, but as of now has no plans to change its policy toward Israel. According to Politico, President Biden was privately enraged by the deadly strike and in a public statement criticized Israel for it, calling for accountability to those responsible and demanding more humanitarian assistance be allowed into Gaza. But 2 senior administration officials say this is as far as he and the White House will go for now. Biden has stood with Israel as it aims for the military defeat of Hamas and the return of the hostages, including several Americans that are still being held in Gaza. And he has resisted calls from progressives and pro-Palestinian voices to condition military aid or impose other restrictions. It comes as World Central Kitchen's founder, Jose Andres, gave a tearful interview to an Israeli news network, mourning the 7 dead and insisting that the IDF airstrike was a direct attack, not a mistake. He insisted his organization had been in coordination with the Israeli military and that they knew who was in the vehicle.
Yeah, he also put out an opinion piece in the New York Times calling for accountability, saying Israelis are better than this. I have friends that are Israelis that are Jewish. I've been to Passover Seders. They're better than this war being waged right now. He also noted that they fed Israelis in the aftermath of October 7th, including the hundreds of thousands of Israelis who've been displaced from their homes in the south from the war, displaced from their homes in the north due to the Hezbollah bombing. And made a call for peace here, though Israelis will note that he doesn't mention Hamas a single time in his opinion piece. And they surmise that it's because he effectively can't operate in Gaza without Hamas permission. So he's probably been pretty reluctant to say anything critical of them. He also doesn't mention the hostages in his opinion piece. So not getting that much attention within Israel, but abroad, Jose does have a very large audience, especially within the U.S. government. A number of officials saying they were already upset about how Israel has been dealing with civilians in the Gaza Strip, but this hits in a different way because of the relationship Jose has, because of the number of officials in the U.S. government. Remember, Andres is also operating in places like Ukraine and other conflict zones around the world. We'll be watching a phone call today to hear what happens, as Joe Biden and Prime Minister Netanyahu are set to speak today. And so we will get a readout from the White House and a readout from the Israelis as to what is said between the two. Israelis have been noting, as Americans have been calling for accountability here when it comes to this strike, that the Americans had their own errant strike in Afghanistan a couple of years ago, where the Pentagon killed 10 Afghan civilians thinking that they were terrorists. And then ultimately their investigation found that they targeted the groups in error, but that no one should have any sort of punishment or ramification for that act. One other note, Jill, before we leave this, as far as Israeli politics is concerned, War Cabinet Minister Benny Gantz made a call yesterday for Israel to hold early elections in September. This is significant. Why? Because he's in the War Cabinet with Netanyahu. While he is an opposition leader and likely would beat him in an election, they have tried to hold hands and stay united here. But Gantz came out in the last day here calling for early elections. Now, as to what this means, not much entirely. This is more rhetorical than anything else. Elections are currently scheduled for the year 2026 in Israel. The only way they can happen early is if members of his coalition leave and he loses his parliamentary majority. Even if Gantz leaves the government, which he isn't leaving right now, Netanyahu will still have a majority of parliament ministers. The magic number is 60. He has 64. And many of those ministers know they would not win re-election if elections happen anytime soon due to the public opinion right now. So despite these calls, if you see them for early elections, that remains very unlikely.
Time now for the speed read from NBC News. Taiwan was shaken Wednesday by its most powerful earthquake in 25 years. At least 9 people were killed, another 1,000 injured, as the quake collapsed hundreds of buildings and triggered tsunami warnings across the region. About 140 people, many of them tourists in badly damaged hotels, were initially feared trapped in the ruins. Rescue efforts were underway to free 71 workers that were trapped in 2 rock quarries in the hardest hit region. There are also reports that multiple people were trapped in 8 collapsed tunnels.
Yeah, it's the strongest earthquake to hit Taiwan since 1999, 25 years ago. That earthquake killed 2,400 people back then. Now, while 1,000 people have been injured so far, as you reported, Jill, 9 dead, about 1,000 injured, though though officials in Taiwan are worried that number could go up in the coming days. You may have seen some of the videos. We posted a few of them on Instagram of some of the buildings that collapsed in eastern Taiwan. One fell on an angle and they were trying to rescue people from inside there. Pretty remarkable pictures, though for the most part, Taiwan, which is a very small island and has a lot of skyscrapers, has very strong building standards. So a vast majority of those buildings held up despite the strength of this quake.
From the New York Times, President Zelensky of Ukraine has signed into law 3 measures aimed at replenishing the ranks of his country's exhausted and battered army. That includes the politically controversial step of lowering the age when men become eligible for mobilization and eliminating some medical exemptions. Parliament passed that legislation, lowering the draft eligibility age to 25 from 27 last May. But Zelensky delayed signing it in hopes that it wouldn't be needed. He relented this week, signing the measure along with laws eliminating a category of medical exemption known as partially eligible and creating an electronic database of men in Ukraine starting at the age of 17 to crack down on draft dodgers. One Ukrainian lawmaker telling the New York Times, "It is a very unpopular decision, and that is why Zelensky held it without signing. Now he has no choice."
Yeah, there's a lot of concern in Ukraine, and now in the 3rd year of the war, Russian forces have been on the offensive. Ukrainian generals have warned of a broader attack this spring or summer as Ukraine's military runs low on ammunition. Many soldiers have been in continual combat for 2 years now. And remember, major aid is still held up in Congress right now. which is concerning the Ukrainians on whether they have literally the number of bullets necessary to keep up the defenses. Ukraine's army is currently at about 1 million soldiers. They are fighting the largest war in Europe since World War II. A lot of urban combat within cities. Casualty rates have been high. And so most men who want to volunteer for the military have already done so. There's a small number of anti-draft protests right now inside the country. So it remains to be seen how successful this is, though for many Ukrainians, they know that if they don't volunteer, they continue to lose more and more of their country to the Russians. Ukraine right now, according to military analysts, is expected at best to hold the existing front lines this year, but only if additional weapons come in from the U.S. They risk losing more territory and falling back if they don't get that.
From Bloomberg, Apple has teams investigating a push into personal robotics, a field with the potential to become one of the company's ever-shifting next big things. Engineers at Apple have been exploring a mobile robot that can follow users around their homes. This is according to sources within the company. Apple has also developed an advanced tabletop home device that uses robotics to move a display around. Near their Cupertino, California campus, Apple reportedly has that secret facility that resembles the inside of a house. It's where engineers can test future devices and initiatives for the home. Apple has been exploring other ideas for the market, including a new home hub device with an iPad-like display. Although the effort's still in the beginning stages and it's not clear if the products will ever be released, Apple is under growing pressure to find new sources of revenue. It scrapped an electric vehicle project in February, and a push into mixed reality goggles is expected to take years to become a major moneymaker.
Yeah, we've told you about those goggles. They're still pretty pricey, require a lot of recharging, trying to figure out the use case there. Jill, this robot that follows you around, I mean, this dates me, but remember the Jetsons? They had Rosie the robot maid.
Do I remember the Jetsons? Yes, of course.
His boy, Elroy. Anyway, they had Rosie the robot. So this is yet the latest example. Like Zoom is one of them. There's a robot like the Jetsons, visionaries when it comes to what the future might look like. I'm still waiting for the cars that fly. But in all seriousness here, to the point about Apple needing the next thing, right now they depend a lot on the iPhone. And the iPhone, of course, continues to be extremely successful, is going to turn 20 years old very soon in the next couple of years. And they've been looking for another product that can help there. And so with robotics, they have a vision here, whether they can develop the sort of Roomba, but like, on crack, right? A robot that does more than just kind of vacuum. And so humanoid robots, we've seen them in Japan, and we've seen people experiment with them, et cetera, but never in any widespread way. So we'll see what comes of it. The original concept for the robot was a device that could navigate entirely on its own without human intervention, serving as a video conferencing tool and other things. Now I guess they have it following you around, so we'll see what that looks like. One pie in the sky idea within Apple was also having this robot handle chores, like cleaning dishes in the sink. Again, Rosie the robot, but apparently they say that's going to have some engineering challenges. They're not sure they can pull that off.
I mean, that is an idea, though.
Well, isn't that a dishwasher? Isn't that a dishwasher?
You make a... Yes, but you do have to wash the dishes before you put them in the dishwasher.
You're right. You're right. You scrape. I'm told you scrape the dishes. You don't wash the dishes because then that negates the purpose of the dishwasher. You got to scrape it. You got to leave a little residue. But I know this is controversial.
All right, Spotify prices are going up. This story from The Verge. For many years, Spotify held strong at its monthly subscription of $9.99. That changed last July when premium jumped to $10.99. And now it appears that the leading subscription music service is planning another price hike and not waiting nearly as long this time around. Bloomberg reports the cost will go up between $1 and $2 in the UK, Australia, Pakistan, and 2 other markets by the end of this month, with an increase planned for US customers later this year. There is one important asterisk here. This all assumes that you are interested in listening to audiobooks on Spotify.
Yeah, part of the reason here for the subscription increases is to cover their cost. Spotify has already grown to become the second largest player of audiobooks behind Audible, and it's quickly expanding into other languages in other countries. But for anyone happy to get their audiobooks elsewhere, Spotify will introduce a new basic plan at the current $10.99 premium rate that does not include audiobooks. Now, hopefully that won't mean that you suffer when it comes to audio quality, though we have seen Netflix do that, right, by charging more for more premium visuals. And whether Spotify does that is a question here. The company still reportedly plans to roll out its long-rumored Supremium plan. One more thing here, the company still apparently plans to roll out its long-rumored Supremium plan that apparently will have a lot of bells and whistles when it comes to audio value, Dolby listening, some extra screen features. Basically, if audio quality really matters to you on the music, sounds like Spotify has something cooking for you.
What would be in the mo.news Supremium plan? Phone calls with you?
No, I think it just goes to the audio quality of this podcast, Jill, that things will pop and there'll be music and effects and we'll talk like Michael Barbaro at the Daily. That's what I would do for Supremium subscribers.
And finally, this story from CNN, an op-ed from Bernie Sanders making his push once again for a 4-day work week. He writes on CNN.com, as more Americans are giving up on government and democracy, the time is long overdue for Congress to stand up for the hard-pressed working families of our country. And an important step in that direction would be implementing a 32-hour work week with no loss in pay. He says despite massive growth in technology and skyrocketing worker productivity, millions of Americans are working longer hours for lower wages. He says France, the 7th largest economy in the world, has a 35-hour work week and is considering reducing it to 32. Belgium has already adopted a 4-day work week. And in Germany in 2023, a trade union movement won a 32-hour work week for metal workers. And he says pilot programs in the UK and South Africa have found that worker productivity and business revenue both go up with a 4-day work week.
Yeah, we posted this on Instagram last month. It got a lot of attention when Sanders first introduced his bill that will reduce the work week to 32 hours over 4 days without a loss of pay. It's called, what else? The 32-Hour Workweek Act. He notes that the 40-hour work week we came up with almost 100 years ago now during FDR's presidency. Technology has changed. Things have changed. And given productivity increases, we don't need to be working all those hours. Now, there are questions as to what this means for small businesses, whether this would increase the cost for businesses. Bernie says no. Republicans say yes. I would caution that this is very unlikely to pass in this Congress, but still interesting that it's getting this attention on Capitol Hill. Again, Republicans are looking for answers here when it comes to whether this will be detrimental to small businesses, restaurants, and trades. If we go to a 32-hour work week, they'll have to bring on additional employees, add those additional costs.
The mo.news newsroom is mobilizing as we speak for a 4-day work week, Moshe.
Oh boy. I always knew you guys were Bernie Sanders people. All right, now let's get to On This Day in History. We begin with April 4th, 1968, 56 years ago today. Civil rights leader Martin Luther King was assassinated by James Earl Ray in Memphis, Tennessee. He was 39 years old at the time. Notably, Jill, in his latter years there in the late 60s, King was facing mounting criticism from young African-American activists who wanted him to be more confrontational about seeking additional changes. They were condemning his nonviolent push. At the time of his assassination, he began speaking vocally out against the Vietnam War, working to form a coalition of poor blacks and poor white Americans. And that was going to be the next evolution there of King's movement post the Civil Rights Act there. In the aftermath, on April 4th, shock and distress over his murder sparked rioting in 100 cities, including burning and looting across the country. His death ended up pushing President Lyndon Johnson and Congress to push through a follow-up to the Civil Rights Act in the months afterwards. On this day in 1973, the original Twin Towers of the World Trade Center, rising 1,350 feet, were completed, becoming the world's tallest buildings. The 110-story towers would stand until 9/11, of course. As far as height, they were quickly surpassed by the Sears Tower in Chicago later that year in 1973. For context, Sears Tower, now Willis Tower, but Chicagoans, we'll always call it Sears Tower, is now the 26th tallest building in the world. Can you believe that, fellow Chicagoans? And a little business history for everyone. 49 years ago today, Microsoft was founded by Bill Gates and Paul Allen in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Jill, it's a big week for technological innovation here. We were noting earlier this week the anniversary of Apple's founding. This week is also the anniversary of Microsoft's founding. And we end with music, as we typically do. 26 years ago today, All My Life from Casey and JoJo reached #1 on the Billboard charts on this day in 1998, Jill.
Bringing back memories, Moshe.
Jill, I was an aspiring radio music DJ, DJing our in-house high school radio station at Stevenson High School in Lincolnshire, Illinois, 88.1 FM. I think the signal reached to the street through the parking lot of the high school, but I took that job very seriously, and I remember playing this song on repeat that spring.
That's a big job for a kid, picking out the songs.
Yeah.
Weighing in maybe on what you liked, introing them.
And having your selections play as classes shifted from fourth period to fifth period during the school day. Those few minutes, I had to choose that song that everyone listened to as they went to their lockers.
It's a lot of pressure.
A lot of pressure on this high schooler. Jill, we end here with another bit of musical history. 37 years ago today, Nothing's Gonna Stop Us Now by Starship reaches #1 on the Billboard charts. Many of you who dabble in the 80s movies might know this song from the movie Mannequin in the 1980s. And Jill, for me, it was our wedding song. Alex and I danced to it at the beginning of our wedding.
I love it, Moshe, because that's not really a typical wedding song that people would think of.
We tried to change it up. At our nuptials.
The News, keeping everyone guessing. All right, we want to thank you for listening to the Mo News podcast. If you like what you hear, please share this with your friends. It will help us grow. Follow us and subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and review us in the App Store.
And check out our latest interview over at Mo News, The Interview, our sister podcast. I have an interview there diving deep. Do you laugh?
Every day you change it to a different
brother
family
podcast,
member.
cousin podcast, uncle podcast. Actually, this is more like the uncle podcast because we're diving into UFO theories here in the U.S. We go to the history of UFOs in America, what presidents knew, why the Pentagon covers it up. It's not for the reason you think. Check it out over at Mo News, The Interview.
Deep tease. All right, guys, have a great day.